Welcome to episode 0 of the Gospel Advancing webinar. I am Jason Lamb at Dare to Share, joined by my good friend, Ben Phillips, and we are excited that you are checking out episode 0. We are hoping and praying that this series of Gospel Advancing webinars will be of value to you in your ministries. The idea of these webinars is to bring you how-tos, how to implement Gospel Advancing ministry into your context, into your local church. And so every episode is going to follow a really similar format. Typically, you're going to receive about 20 to 30 minutes of training, oftentimes from our good friend, Ben Phillips. And then we're also going to feature a panel. So during Ben's training or whoever's training, you're going to be prompted to interact with chat, sending in questions, answering polls. And then that panel is going to take some time to respond to your questions, your ideas, and really debrief that with you to make it even more practical and more applicable to your context. Each episode is also accompanied by a listening guide. So there'll always be a resource that you can download, take notes on as we go through the training. But Ben, as we talk about the Gospel Advancing webinars, it might be helpful to explain a little bit of what Gospel Advancing is.
Absolutely. You know, today we're going over Gospel Advancing, how to be Gospel Advancing. It's kind of the kickoff of this how-to series. And the heartbeat of Gospel Advancing is that we want to see every teen everywhere hear the gospel from a friend. And through time and study and working with leaders all over the world, we've found that there are 7 specific values that help us grow in this and help us to accomplish this mission in several different contexts. Jason, why don't you tell us what that first value is?
Absolutely. Value number 1 is intercessory prayer fuels it. So it's the simple idea that as we engage our students in reaching their friends, they simply need to talk to God about their friends before they talk to their friends about God. We want to be praying for the lost as we seek to reach the lost. And so intercessory prayer fuels it.
And value number 2 is relational evangelism drives it. And the heart here is this. We want to see students equipped to have gospel conversations, not just presentations. A lot of times when we're sharing the gospel or evangelizing, it becomes something that almost can be a little robotic and doesn't feel very personal. But we found that if we want to see long-term discipleship happen, if we want to see people really respond well to the gospel, we need to be personal in our connection of how we present it. So we work hard to train in relational evangelism.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I love about relational evangelism is I can engage a stranger in a gospel conversation in a relational way, as well as friends that I see every single day. Value 3 is leaders fully embrace and model it. And this one is key for us, for you as gospel advancing leaders engaging in this content and in this ministry philosophy is, yes, we need to train up our students to pray for the lost and share the gospel with their friends. We need to model this as leaders. We need to demonstrate it by the lives that we live, tell the stories of our successes and failures, but our students need to know that we're in this with them, not just delegating the mission of Christ to them, but that we're leading the way alongside of them.
Absolutely. You know, if the leaders aren't in it, we don't win it. That's just kind of how it goes, is what we found. You like that, right? That's good. It rhymes and it helps. The next value number 4 is a disciple multiplication strategy guides it. Just like what we've been talking about with relational evangelism, leaders embracing and modeling it, it leads into this relational discipleship that builds across generations so that we can start reaching in a broad way. It's going from an idea of addition of one reaching one to one reaching one who reaches two, who reaches 4, who reaches, and it goes on. And we find that over time, we can actually reach every teen in the world in a much shorter time using evangelism and discipleship rather than just evangelism alone.
That's right. It leads to that multiplication that we desire to see in our ministries and as we reach this next generation. Speaking of that, a bold vision, focus it. This is value number 5. As Ben shared a minute ago, our vision at Dare to Share, the vision of the Gospel Advancing movement is every teen everywhere hearing the gospel from a friend. And there's a billion with a B teenagers on the planet. That's a huge number. And oftentimes as leaders, like I think about that number and I'm like, I don't know what I can do about a billion. But when I narrow my focus to my context, my community, where I go to church at Storyline Church in Arvada, Colorado, we know there's 14,000 students who don't know Jesus and they're not in a church or in a youth ministry. And so that's a vision that we can do something about, that we can rally around, that we can champion with other churches in our community. And so what is your vision for your community? How many lost students are in your city, in your county? We want to train you, equip you, encourage you, inspire you to go for it then. Have that vision for your community. lead your students to reach those kids with the gospel.
Absolutely. You know, in my community in Western Nebraska, we have 3,558 teens, and we've been working hard to see that happen there, of every one of those teens hearing the gospel from a friend. The next thing that we want to see is how do we track this? Like, how do we keep this going? And how do we know that we're actually accomplishing the mission? And so value number 6 is this: biblical outcomes measure it. It's pretty easy to track attendance in our youth ministries or at our churches. It's easy to keep track of funding that comes in and those kind of things, but those are not always the best ways to measure success towards the vision, especially if our vision is to see the gospel get out. We have to measure things that show us true biblical outcomes. And we can look all throughout the book of Acts, all throughout the rest of Scripture, and we see God doing work that results in biblical outcomes. And in the same way, in your context, in my context, everywhere that we've been, we can see biblical outcomes from the work of gospel advancing values being implemented in these places, and seeing teens carry the gospel out. And it's pretty incredible to see. We count gospel conversations, prayers for the lost, baptisms, salvations, and we start tracking these, not so that we can put notches on something saying we've achieved this, but because it's exciting to see God working in this way that we couldn't have done without him. And so that's what's amazing about those biblical outcomes, and it changes what our focus is and what our view of success really is in ministry.
That's right. Yeah, attendance matters, but things like spiritual milestones and markers and spiritual maturation in our students matters most. And so are we measuring the things that demonstrate that? Value number 7 is simply this: ongoing programs reflect it. The idea of gospel advancing is not just a check the box, we did an annual event or we did an outreach event and call it good. The idea of ongoing programs reflected is that you are instilling these values in your weekly ministry program, in your calendar of youth ministry events, so that throughout the entire year, you're moving through the different values, applying them in a variety of different ways, so that your ministry can be described as gospel advancing, as opposed to just an event that you pull off. This really is a way of doing ministry, which is why we're so passionate about this webinar series of bringing you the how to implement gospel advancing ministries with each episode.
Yeah, one of the ways that we really want to help in this, using this series, is that we don't want it to just be something that you jump on and listen to us talk. We want to interact with you. Absolutely. And so one of the things throughout the training, as Jason mentioned at the beginning, is there's going to be an opportunity for you to be putting in or answering different prompt questions, putting in your own questions into the chat. And it's not just questions that are going in the chat that we just kind of type in an answer. We want to have time to actually respond to your questions, to talk about it. And so at the end of every episode, the whole last half of every episode, we're going to be sitting down in a panel with leaders, with staff members from here, and working together to answer your questions in a way that helps you be able to practically apply things right away into this. Because if it's a how-to and we're not giving you the how-to, it doesn't really help at all, and it doesn't meet that need. And so that's our goal, is we want to see you be able to interact into this, to get your questions answered for your specific context, and then to be able to apply it. And here's one thing I want to encourage you on. As you're involved in these, don't hesitate to ask a question, because I guarantee you, you're not the only person watching who has that same question. So you're going to, just like we always tell our students, hey, be the one who speaks up. We need to do that as leaders and model it out in the midst of this too.
That's exactly right. So yeah, in conclusion, as we wrap up today, we want to make sure you sign up for regular updates to know when these episodes are coming. Be a part of this community that engages around this conversation. And Ben and I and our team, we can't wait to see you on the next episode.